Alrighty, so yesterday I believe Harley walked you through just the basics of the homework, adding in the sections. This morning we were working with the photos controller, right? So now that we have our photos model, we need to be able to serve that up to the users so that they can see it when they come to our webpage, right? So the controller is responsible for finding the right models and serving it to the view. So in the first part, right, we just said we want to create a new photo. We want to do photo.new, right? Everyone's familiar with this terminology now, photo.new. Does it save it in the database? When I call photo.new, is that going to go ahead and save it in the database?
I don't think so.
It does not, exactly. So calling photo.new does not save it in the database. It just creates a model for us and assigns it to add photo. And then once we have that, we can use it in our view. So Form 4 is one of those Rails helpers that we started to use. It takes in, though, as you notice here, it takes in a model. So it's not just taking in empty data, it's taking in an instance of a photo. Now this is a photo we just created, right? So this photo here is the same one that we're going to use here, and it has empty values. All of the fields are empty. We just created it. So we're going to ask the user to supply those values for us, right? So we ask the user to supply username, URL, and caption, and the placeholder is how the user knows what values to supply, right? So once you do that, it'll send it to create, right? So here in create is when we actually are going to take the photo that the user added in the details and save it in the database. So we're again going to create a new photo. This one, though, is not yet saved in the database. It's just an instance of a photo. And we're going to pass it photo params, right? And what are photo params? Well, we've defined that down here. And so when we ask for params, we say we require there to be a photo object in the parameters that come back, right? And we'll permit certain fields. What fields? Well, the fields that we created in the database, right? The name, the URL, the caption, and for fun, we're going to incorporate a likes count. Now, why do we do this step? What is so necessary that this step is needed?
I think that the way it works is by default, you're not allowed to edit these by just submitting a form. You first have to go in and explicitly permit to be able to change those in the database.
We don't actually, can I edit this? So instead of doing that, oops, we could do something like this. So instead of params, right, which is simply taking the parameters that the server gets. We could do that, but instead we choose to do it this way. And this syntax is the same as that syntax, right? Just the Rails way is same syntax. But either of these do work. But we choose to do this way. And this is called strong parameters. Does anyone want to guess why we do it this way? It's not what? Sorry. No, it's still new.
We don't want to let them change other types of data.
Exactly. So the reason we do this way is it's for security purposes, right? This is essentially a whitelist. We're specifying which attributes we'll allow to go through to our model. Okay, so maybe our model has other fields, like a date created field, right? And we don't want to let the user to modify the date created field, right? We didn't maybe show that in the view, but if a user is smart, they could modify the request and they could pass up more fields. So this is essentially saying we're allowing these fields to pass through and we'll save them in the database. It's just more secure that way. It's a whitelist so that we don't allow other things to pass through.
And by default, nothing is whitelisted. If we don't do any of this,
Yeah.
or all of it is whitelisted.
If we don't do anything, anything the user passes up goes right through.
Also, by default, everything.
Everything, there's no whitelist. Everything is permissible, right? So if we do photo.new params, the user could pass up whatever field they want, and that'll get passed right through into the database.
Oh, okay. I thought it was the other way around. Okay.
And it's also possible that if they send up information for a field that we don't have, it could throw an error. It could say, trying to set key on photo, but it doesn't exist. Great. So after we've gone ahead and created our photo object, we've given it the right attributes, we go ahead and save it, right? And here notice we don't just call photo.save, we put it in an if statement. And that's because .save returns to us either true or false, right? If it returns true, that means that it was a successful operation, it saved it. If it returns false, it means it did not save, there was some issue. So if it's true, we come into here, right? Fantastic. We created a photo, we saved it, it successfully saved in the database. We're going to take the user back to the home page, and when it flash success, right, photo added. And this is starting to use some bootstrap formatting, kind of make it nicer for the user. If the photo didn't save, we'll say render new. What does that do? It's going to take us back to here, to our new action, right? And the new action has this view that corresponds to it. So it'll essentially take the user back to the same page they were on by rendering this view with this action. Okay, and that is in the instance of there being an error. So if the photo didn't save, that means there's some error, and we take them back. Now the next step though was, if there's an error, how does our user actually know what the error was? Right? So Rails, when you try to save it, if the save is not successful, it'll add in photo.errors, and this essentially is all the errors that came back from trying to save it. So if we want to show to the user what was going on, we can say you cannot save, and we can ask for the number of errors and pluralize. Are you guys familiar with pluralize? It's a Rails helper that turns a word into either a singular or plural version. So if there's more than one error, it'll say errors, right? So the end result, if there's more than one error, right, it'll produce error. But if there's many errors, it'll say errors, right? It's just kind of a nice helper with Rails. So we'll say cannot save due to an error or an errors. And then here at photo.errors.fullMessages, we can actually go ahead and display the message that the database returned to us. So the user can see, oh, maybe there was a required field that wasn't properly passed in, or there's some other issue. We can display that message to the user. Does that all make sense? So those just two basic actions, right? New and create. New, the goal was to have a form. The user could fill out the information. And create, the goal was to actually save it in the database and then show the user the successful operation, or show the user that it actually didn't work and there was a failure. All right, so today we're going to continue on taking this further. So this was, I believe, what Harley had worked on yesterday, right? The coder restaurants. And he'd done some things with creating sections. Does this seem familiar to everyone?
Yeah.
The homework walkthrough? So let's go ahead and clone the application. Great, so we are going to go into the application. And right, this is now our Rails application. As we can see, we have our standard things. Great, right? So we have our gem file. We have all our folders. Right. The first thing we do when we create a Rails application is what? Rails DB, not seed. Create. Exactly. And we actually can do multiple operations at once. So if we want, we can do DB seed. We can do. We'll just create it first. Oh. Let's see what version of Ruby he's using. It doesn't say. So we'll run bundle install, and we'll install our gems. There we go. Awesome. So now we can run Rails DB. Great. And any luck, it'll create for us. What type of database are we using? PostgreSQL, exactly. Fantastic. Cool.
How do you pronounce it?
PostgreSQL.
PostgreSQL.
That's what I've said. It's kind of a funny name. If you can manage to say, well, not smiling, I think you win. Great. So this is our repository. Let's check out our schema. Right now, the schema has a sections table in the database, right? We created that yesterday. And if we look at the database file, right, this is the migration file we created yesterday. So very simple. All the section has is a name and a timestamp. So we need to run Rails DB, not seed, because seed creates data. Migrate, exactly. So we actually need to create the table in the database so that the database knows how to handle the information. And there we go. Now we have it. And do we have a seeds file? We do. It's empty. So we could run Rails DB seeds, but it wouldn't actually do anything.
If you don't mind, could you quickly go over like those three, like DB create, DB migrate, and DB seed? So DB create, like, well, I mean.
So when we first create the application, right, we have no database.
Okay.
And we have this file here, which is the database.yaml, right? So this file is config initializers. Is it just config? All right, it's in config database.yaml, right? And so this tells our application where to look to find the database, the physical database. In this case, it's development, right? So now that we have our actual database, our application is, all right, I need to connect to this thing. This is our database, but that doesn't yet know how to use it, right? It gets requests from all sorts of things. And so we see here there's this thing called database. So essentially, if you imagine a giant database, you can have different databases within it. Kind of like you have like Google Drive, you have different folders, right, within it. Same thing. So you have different databases so that you can have different applications on the same machine sharing the database, right? So each week, if we create a new Rails project, it's not going to get the data from the previous week. That's not going to bleed in because we create these separate databases. So in this instance, we're telling it, all right, we have a database, and we're going to call it Anthoi Development, right? And that's just the name of our application, /development. So we say, all right, we're going to use this database, but this doesn't actually exist yet. We specified that we should use it, but nothing has created it so far in our database. So if we try to connect, PostgreSQL will throw an error, right? It'll say, uh-oh, that database is not yet created. And actually, let's take a look at that. So Rails DB drop. We'll drop them. So now we have we're back to square one, right? It's like we just created our application, and we have no database. If we try to connect via Rails console, and try to look at our sections, it throws an error.
So
no database error, right? That database does not yet exist. So it looks in PostgreSQL, it says, all right, give me all of the elements in the sections table in the development database for application, but it does not exist yet, so it throws an error.
Okay, yeah. And then one more question. Why don't we send, is it for security reasons or because it's, like, why don't we send like a database with, is it possible to send like from one user to another?
So like you could create a database and send it to me?
Yeah, like why is it not?
Yeah, so I could essentially clone your database on your hard drive and send it to me.
Yeah.
But that's a lengthy process because everyone has it configured separately. Right, so like my database expects user credentials that work with me, my user credentials. So if I were to take your actual database and copy it to mine, I'd have to modify the credentials and do some work to make it work. So it's easier if I clone a repository just to run Rails DB create. And that's also why we use DB seeds, because that way if you have some data you want in your database, you can put it in seeds, and so when I clone it, I also then run it. There's also problems with keeping things in sync as time moves on, so it's easier if we each have our own database systems, but we each know how to connect to our own respective database.
Okay. Thank you.
So that was DB create, right?
Yeah.
And since we just dropped our database, we actually have to run it again. So we'll run Rails DB create, and now we have, you'll notice it creates two databases for us, right? One for development and one for tests. Excuse me. And that's so that when we run our tests, we're going to have a clean slate, right? All the stuff that we do locally, we play around with it, we create, we test, won't actually affect our testing database. Cool. Great. So we have our DB, and because we dropped it, we got to run again. Rails DB migrate, and that'll create for us our sections table. Fantastic. So now let's go ahead and open up a console, right? And this is just a quick test to make sure things are working. So if we say section.all, we see a database query, select sections from sections, right? So a SQL query, fantastic. It returns back to us an empty array. And that's because we have no data in there yet, right? We've created the table, but there's nothing in it yet, so it returns back emptiness. Fantastic. Finally, let's go ahead and run a Rails server. And looks like it's up and running. So we'll go to localhost.
We still need to see though, right?
We will need to create some data. Right? So right now there's no data in the database, which is why it returns back nothing. So we will need to either create it manually or create it via save file. Exactly. So great. So this is just a proof that our application's up and running. Cool. We have a contact us page with the map, right? Walked through this yesterday. And if we click on menu, we see a menu and there's nothing there. Right? So we now should start thinking about, all right, now that we have our sections, we want to start creating a menu and showing that data back to the user. Right? So that suggests that we need to create some food. We need to attach the food to a menu, to a section. Right? So let's start looking at the code. So we have here section, and it's just a name, and it validates it. But let's maybe create some sections, and we can start to get an idea of how to model our data. So actually, I'm going to create a separate branch. Let's see, food items. And I'll create a pull request so we can, I won't mess with Harley's master branch in case he decides to throw away all my code or something. Great, so we have section. So now let's maybe create some seeds. So if section.count equals 0, we'll create some data. Right, so this is our DB seeds file. We want to create some data, and we want to create some sections. So we could just say, section dot new, right? And that'll create a new section for us. But we actually want to go ahead and create it in the database. So we'll say section.create, right? Everyone's familiar with section.new and section.create. So
Create just includes save, right?
exactly. Right? If I say section.new, it returns to me a section object. But if I look in the database, nothing's saved. Same. So if I create section.create, it threw an error. Roll back. Right? It tried to save it. It had an issue, and it didn't save it. And if we want to again inspect the database, we see nothing is there. Why didn't it save it?
We don't have the branch.
We don't have the name, right? We ask for the required validates name presence true, right? But let's just say we didn't know that. We're like, this should work, and it didn't. So we can say section equals section.create, right? Same thing, section dot errors, and right, we get an error message. And similar to the lab, if you want to display it, we can say full messages. Name can't be blank. Great. That's what we thought, but we confirmed that that's the case. So if we wanted to create a section, we have to pass in a name field. Hey, there we go. Look at that, it's saved. How do we know it's saved? Well, there's a bunch of database statements, and if you're not familiar with SQL, it's not as important. But what's important to note is there's a commit here. The commit lets us know that the operation successfully transacted. The database did what it needed to do, and it committed it to the database log, so it's now there. A few other things to note is now we have an ID field. Before we didn't have an ID. So the ID lets us know that we've saved it in the database. If we wanted to know, we can also persisted. Let me get back to true. So that's just a helper method letting us know that our database object was saved. The easiest way I think is always looking at the ID, right? Because if you create something without saving it, you'll notice that there's no ID. And similarly, if you ask if it's persisted, it's false. Right? So we have here now our database object, our first one with the name test. Cool. I'm actually going to go ahead and delete that question.
So create, you send it.
Exactly. Create.
The system check if it's saved or not.
Persisted is you could in the future use it if you want to check to see if it's saved or not. It's just a helper method.
Use new and save.
Exactly. So create.
True or false.
Exactly. Create is the same thing as calling new, and then the second line calling save. Save returns. What does it return?
True or false.
Exactly. It returns true or false. So just many ways of doing the similar thing, right? You can check to see if it works. And I'm actually going to go ahead and destroy. And we can also check, great, back to 0 in our database. So we have our seats file. We actually want to create something, and we want to give it a name, right? Give it some name, and that's really all we need. Well, what does a section represent? We're talking here about menus, right? So a section in the context of a menu, right? What does that mean? And this is the step we call data modeling. We start to think about our idea. How do we represent that in the database, right? So we have our idea for an application. We have some user interaction. We have some elements. How do we represent that? So the first item was a section. What does a section represent? What are we going to use sections for? Food items, exactly. So what could be an example section? Exactly, breakfast, right? It's a category, essentially. We'll say we'll create a section called breakfast, and then we'll add food to that section. Make sense? So, breakfast. Great, we'll create a section. Now, if we want, we can do that again. We can do some copy paste, right? Well, that's boring. We can do better. There's a reason that programming is so simple in some sense. Breakfast, lunch. Maybe we'll say a snack and dinner. Great. There we go. Right, we also can do this one line. And again, with Rails, right, you don't even need, these are optional, right? You could also just do that. You also could do something like, oops, params, right, equals name, and you create params. Right, all these just the same way. Just a matter of preference. I don't know what Harley's told you, but I kind of prefer to keep a name like that. Did he mention style at all?
Styling for
Like-
for Ruby?
Yeah,
No, we've done it with that.
you have. So some people prefer that way. I always prefer making explicit with parentheses. Great. So section.create. If we want to, right, we could store it, and then, you know, if section.persisted, we can output a message to the user. Saved section with name equals. helpful to have some messaging as well, right? So the user who runs this knows what's going on. Alrighty, cool. So breakfast, lunch, not else. Looks like you already have some sections. Great. That good to everyone? Let's go ahead and run it. Rails DB. C. Cool. So we got our nice debug messaging. Create some sections. If we ever wanted to, we have some nice messaging here, so let's know that it's created. But if we wanted to double check, great. We have 4. The first one is breakfast. The last one is dinner. It's pretty good. Cool. So we have now our sections. Do we have a controller? Let's see. App controllers. Menu controller. Great. So here in the index, we want to load all the sections and display them. Let's check our routes. Looks like we have just a get menu, which routes us to the menu index, right? So this tells you, go to the menu controller, look at the index action, which is this guy. Great. So when we come here, it'll load in all the sections, and it'll assign it to this variable, add sections, so that the view can then use it. Finally, let's check out our views. And it looks like we have here some simple view for the section. That is great. Let's try it out. There we go. So now we have our simple sections up and running. If we click on it, it appends it here as a parameter, right? So it'll keep track of which is which, right? Now, if you notice here, it adds it in as a parameter in the request. So menu path section, right, is blank. So that section, where does that come from? That comes from this guy. If I change this name to, I don't know, Niraj is hungry, and refresh, right? What happens if I click here? We get Niraj is hungry, right? Simply just the key as the parameter. So it gets passed around. Now, on the index page, right, we could say if params, what was the name of our parameter? Section, right? If param section. Rails has a nice helper as well, so we can say .present just to see if it's there. Very similar thing, just saying if param section. We can maybe get food items for that section. So that suggests that we need our next model. All right, so this is our section model, right? Pretty simple. Time for our next model. Rails generate model. Seen that before, right? Pretty standard. What do we want to create? We want to create a food item, right? But there's many ways of doing things. So we can do generate model. You guys have also seen Rails generate controller, right? You saw it yesterday. Have you guys seen Rails generate scaffold? Okay. What's the difference between scaffold versus Rails generate controller or Rails generate model?
Scaffold pretty much created all.
Yeah. Scaffold creates a lot. Have you guys seen this one?
Yeah.
What does this guy do?
That's what I said it now.
7 routes. What else does it do for us? It creates the routes and
The roots.
creates the routes, yeah. What else? And it creates for us the model, right? It also creates for us the model. So it does the model and the routes for us. Scaffold does everything. The nice part, it does everything. The bad part, sometimes it does too much. Sometimes you don't need everything. So in some cases you need it, in some cases you don't. In this case, let's use it. Why not?
Does it really matter when or
I mean, all these do is they create files for you. Worst case, if you use the wrong thing, you create extra files you don't need, or you don't create enough files, you need to create your own. Not the worst, right? It's good when you have an application that starts to have multiple people, is if you don't want extra files, because then it's like people think that file's used and it's not, right? But that's more of a concern with project management, right? There's no harm in running the wrong command. Worst case, you can always undo the command, or you can just manually delete the files you didn't want and go from there. All right, so we have our food item. What fields do we want on the food item?
Price.
Probably need a name. We need a price. What type of data should the price be?
Integer. Wait, no. Integer is full number, right?
It's float.
Integer is like a number that doesn't have a decimal.
Yeah, so maybe float.
Float?
Yeah.
Let's go with decimal. Probably a description, right? And the description, right? String, right? We covered string is the default, right? But a string is limited to how many? 255, right? A string is limited, so we're gonna say text, and a text actually has no limit. It's same type of data, it's still a string, but there's no limit on how long it can be.
And section, maybe?
Yeah, so we need to reference it to the section. So you know what comes here? Right, so this is a reference to the section. The section to me is like a section ID. So we can say section ID integer, and that'll relate our row in the database table to the corresponding section. Right, so if we have an item like eggs, and then we try to say that's a breakfast food, the row in the table for eggs would then have section ID point to section ID breakfast, right? But this is Rails. There's easier ways to do things. We want to use a helper called references. It'll essentially create for us a connection between food item and section. Say it again. It'll create, yeah, so Scaffold creates for us a database table and a model for food item. And a reference would then be a foreign key, right? A foreign key. It'll point to the section table. Great, let's run it. As you can see, a lot of stuff. Database migration, our app, model, some tests. Tests are always great. It added in the resources, so it added in the routes for us. A whole bunch of views, some helpers, some JSON builders. Fantastic. Let's take a look at our database migration, right? Name, price, description. Here you notice dot references, right? It's referencing the section, and here foreign key is true. Foreign key is a database terminology. Are you guys familiar with foreign keys? So foreign key means that you're relating one database table row to a separate database table row, right? So we have breakfast. Breakfast is a row in the section table. Now we're gonna have a food item, some sort of breakfast item. What's your favorite breakfast item? Eggs, okay. Opla or chung, right? Gum chung, we'll say, eggs and rice. And we're gonna relate that to breakfast. How do we know that? Well, in the database table for food items, we'll create a column called section ID. And that'll point to breakfast. So the section ID will be section ID is 2 because I'm actually just gonna complain. So, right, that's our breakfast item, ID 2, right? So our food item, the row in the table for our breakfast, like our eggs, will have a section ID equal to 2. And that tells us then that it relates to this section. Okay? Now there's a reason we don't just do this. Why is that a bad idea?
Because maybe too many people, too many relations between foreign key.
This is not a foreign key. This is just adding in a string.
Well, we don't know which within section which row we're connecting to.
We have an idea, right? So let's say we want to create an item for eggs. And we know conceptually that eggs are breakfast food.
No, I mean, when we do this section
Yeah.
name, we're not connecting it to.
It's not clear enough.
No, it's,
Wouldn't-
never mind.
We could create a food item. So if we have that, we could then create food item dot create name eggs section name breakfast. What's wrong with that?
Do breakfast.
It's what?
There's a duplicate breakfast.
Yeah. So we're starting to duplicate data, right? This right here has no way of connecting to this guy. The ultimate goal is to connect our food item to the section, right? If we do this, it's good. It's not going to create a new section. It's just not going to relate at all. They're not going to be connected. Additionally, we start to have what's called data redundancy or data duplication, right? Now we have the section name breakfast. We also have it stored here. And what if we decide, you know what? Breakfast is not really a good name. We really offer brunch, right? I want to change the name of the section from breakfast to brunch. Well, if I do that, now all of a sudden these point to nothing, right? Before they point to breakfast, but I change the name breakfast to brunch, and I lose all of my connections. So rather than connect things based off the name, we typically want to connect things on the ID, because this ID, once it's created, does not change. Okay? So the ID for this section that corresponds to breakfast is ID 2. As long as this breakfast exists, the ID is not going to change. So that's why we don't do this, because now we have data duplication, we have all sorts of data consistency issues, and that becomes problematic.
Doesn't a foreign key have to be a primary key and not a table?
It should. I mean, there are ways around it, but a foreign key should be a primary key on the table. And the reason for that is it helps with lookup speed. So if the foreign key is a name, a string like breakfast, that's a slow query. It's a text search. That's very slow. But if you're looking up by ID, instant, very fast. And that's the reason why. Great, so we don't want to do that. Instead, we want to do this, which will create for us, in essence, this is the same thing as saying same thing. Okay, so this Rails Hopper is nice because it just provides some more functionality, but deep down it's going to do the exact same thing. It's going to create for us a section ID with an integer. Does that make sense? Great. Rails DB, migrate. Let's go ahead and migrate this thing. Awesome. So now we have food item. And let's check out our model. Food item belongs to section. Where did that come from? That was part of this references. So when you specify references, it will add this belongs to section. Nice. We'll talk about this in a second. But let's add in some validation. So we probably want to validate some fields. Validates name and price. We'll say present's true. Right? Just make sure that we have a name and price so we don't end up with some bad data. And actually, I'll set up below. Awesome. So now, send to our Rails console. So, great. Cool. We have our breakfast. Breakfast dot food items. Can I do that? Undefined method. We have not yet set that up. We'll get to that in a second. But for now, let's just create a food items dot new. And we'll say name. Eggs. Such a bad name. We need someone give me a better name for some breakfast.
Egg Benedict.
Eggs Benedict. Eggs Benedict. And a price? 30,000.
Is that how you put in
That's the same thing as like that. Except in Rails, if you do that, that'll treat it as two separate things.
Right.
So I could do that, but to make it helpful, just so my eyes can kind of break them up, same thing. Those are very equivalent. Great. Food item. These things always get me, the plural. Cool. So now we have our food item. We have name. We have price. Description is nil. We'll add a description. Tasty eggs. What's that about? On an English muffin. Yeah. I moved to Vietnam for 2 months and forget my English food. Man. It's bad. I'm gonna go back and be like, what's this menu, man? Just give me a bowl of pho. Yeah, pancakes. What? All right, cool. So, can you see that?
Oh yeah, good.
So, great. We have our name. We have our price. We have a description. Section item. Section ID is nil. Right? We wanted to connect this with our breakfast, which is ID 2. So, the old-fashioned way, the manual way, is to say something like that. And now it's there. But that's pretty bad. We have to kind of look it up. I'm sure we could do better. Right? But now we have an ID there. What if I do this? Food item, that section. Right? And food item here, right, is our food item. That section. Look at that. It brought to us our section. They're connected. Now, how did it know how to use that? Belongs to section. All right. So because we have that forward key in the database, right? Here's our database. We have section ID, right? That points to us, our row in the food item table, to the corresponding section, right? Now here, when we say belongs to section, it essentially, it's a Rails helper that knows how to use that field section ID. So if we look at the code here, it'll say find me the section where section.id equals $1, which is number 2. And where did it get number 2 from? It got it from the section ID here. Right? So we can say food item.section, and it'll find for us the corresponding section based off the section ID given here. Okay? So if we wanted to, we could say, section equals section dot find, and then we'd find food item dot section ID. Same thing. I'm actually gonna. That's the same thing, right? We're saying, all right, find for us the section that corresponds to it. But if we want, instead, we just do food item dot section. Much faster, much easier.
So the update and create and will be updated when we commit it. Always work on the table.
Created and updated that, are just kind of standard Rails database columns.
It will not be created when we create the food item.
Exactly, right? The section here was created at minute 12, so about 20 minutes ago, right? And the breakfast, we actually have yet to save it, so there's empty.
Did you do food item dot section dot name and then change the section's name?
Can we? Who thinks we can do this? Yeah?
I think so.
You don't think so?
Because we're a company.
Okay, so you
You can do that.
Agent.
Yeah. Right? Because this returns to us the full section model. Right? Full section model.
and section
Yeah.
section dot find too.
Right? Now, look at that. But did we save it yet?
So you need to say
No.
food
So
item.
what are we gonna get?
Breakfast.
Breakfast. Exactly. But here we have best breakfast. So, oops.
Section.
Plural, man. Plural gets me every time. There we go. Now,
So we cannot say that they will need to, we cannot just change it directly. Let's need to get around 1.7.
yeah. So you have to get the object, modify it, and save it back. Let's go ahead and cool. Alrighty, so there's our section. And our food item, which is not yet saved. So we'll go ahead and save it. Great. So now the food item and the food item.section. What if we comment that out? Right? So belongs to section. We'll comment it out. What happens?
No more than food item dot section.
Sorry. So there's our food item. Food item.section. Undefined method. Right? So we still could get access to it because we have an ID stored there. Right? So if we really wanted to, we could still get access to it. Right? We still have the ID, we still can get it. But it's much easier if we instead just say belongs to section.
So it makes it easier to work with them, right?
Makes it easier to work with. Great. Now how do we go the other way? Breakfast. Section dot find. Let's say I don't want, where. Do you guys do find by name? You guys know that one in? Yeah. Then you also can do find name.
It's a SQL.
Up. Find by. There we go. Just more ways of looking for things. Cool. So we have breakfast. Do you think we can do that? Who thinks we can do this right now?
Did it has menu yet?
Food, so that would be food slash.
Ah, undefined method food items. Why not? So belongs to is a one-way relationship, right, between the food item and the section. There's nothing here. So what's the inverse of belongs to? Has many. Now, it didn't add this automatically because we ran the scaffold command, right? And the scaffold command added this for us. This came automatic. This one, we have to add in ourselves. This came automatic, right? But has many is the inverse of belongs to. So belongs to means that it's a member of something else. And in this case, section has many food items, right? Not just one, but it has a bunch of food items. And that's why we don't just say has one food item, right? That doesn't really make sense. In this context, it has many food items. Sweet. We'll reload. Alrighty, we got breakfast. Now do you think this will work? There we go. Notice though that it returns to us not just one, but it returns to us a collection or an array. And that's also knows the plurality, right? Dot food items, it's plural. So, you know, we could ask for the count. We could ask for the first item. We could ask for the last item. In this case, they're the same. Let's say I want to build something new. I could also call create. Yeah? So let's just say new for now. Ah, look at that. Section ID is already filled out for us. Right?
Yeah, that's cool.
How did it know that? Well, because we did this, right?
Based on the section.
We said breakfast.food item. So it knew to take the section ID from the section, right? This is our section. It took the section ID and went ahead and put it for us in the thing. We also could do something similar. So let's go to create something. Give me another breakfast food. You said pancakes? That's sweet breakfast. Price?
$4.99.
We're mixing currencies, man. So I don't know. 80,000. Description?
Yummy.
Great.
Should be Popeyes.
Anything else?
Breakfast.
Nope. Name, price, description. And section ID is already going to create for us because of this connection.
What's the food item ID going to be?
There it is. Now the food item ID is 2. Right? Section ID? 2. So now if I ask for breakfast, dot food items, dot count, what should we get back? 2. And there we go. We'll see them both. Eggs Benedict and pancakes. You guys do that, yeah? Or faster way. There's no pluck.
What's the name right there? Or nil. Is that nil?
Nil is this guy. It's an unsaved one, but we created it in the Rails console, so it still exists. If we exit and reload, it's gone. Yeah? Does that make sense? So now we've connected our models, right? So we have section and food items, and then we've connected them so that we can use both of them. If we have a section, we can get our food items. And if we have a food item, we can get its section.
So when we design database, so there's a section, we have food item, and the relationship is belongs to as many.
Exactly.
So if we have a sibling of a section, then there's just one section two. So the relationship.
A section 1, section 2. So they don't have any relationship right now. Right? They're both different sections, but section 1 doesn't relate to section 2. They're just sections.
So we should just design the database to have one wide relationship like that.
Yeah. So in this case, right, sections and food items, it's a parent relationship, right? So the section is the parent. It has many food items with the child. And so we've designed that, and the main part is this here, right? That's our link. That's our foreign key. So that is what tells our database row where to look and where to find the corresponding parents. Okay? Great.
It says there at the bottom, add foreign key
On which one?
The bottom 5.
Yeah, 34.
34.
One key food item section.
It's adding an index for us, so that the operation is much faster. So when you look up a section from the food items, it'll be a fast operation. If you familiar with the database index, so the database has an ID field. You won't see it here, but the ID field is on every table. If you have an ID, you know where to look, right? ID is 10. Oh, great, just look at row 10. But an index makes the operation even faster. It stores the location of every row, and so when you basically want to look up something, it knows where to look directly. It just speeds up that operation. The downside is whenever you modify any row, so writing or updating, it takes slightly longer because it also has to modify the index. So it's an alternate way of keeping track of where things are so that when you want to read things, it's faster. The expense is it's slower to write. I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's more of a database kind of configuration. It really only starts to be an issue once you start to get tables with thousands of tables with thousands of rows. Then maybe you want to consider database index. Before then, not a big deal. Yeah. Alrighty. So here we have our resources, food items. Good. So it gives us all the routes. Let's see if we can play around with them. So these are all created by the scaffold. Remember when we ran the scaffold, we had a bunch of different views. So we had food items. We have new, right? We have edit. Oh, we didn't have an ID. Edit. Yeah. Thanks, Lori. There we go. So there's our edit. If we wanted to, we could post and delete. Here are our food items. Right? And all these are created for us by scaffold. Pretty handy. So now our goal is to display the corresponding items, right? And you notice here we had the section breakfast. So we had param section, right? Food items dot what? Well, actually, we should probably get our section first. Equals section dot find by name param section. Actually, we can just, now that we have the section, we can say section dot food items. Yeah. And
Why is
then
it Param's ID there?
why is it not param ID? Because of here.
Oh, okay.
So sections dot each. Great. Link to. Let's just do very briefly. And we'll just say name, just very briefly, just to see how this looks. Pardon my bad formatting.
I think losing people on
Lord, master debugger, man. You're gonna give me a chance to debug my own code. Cool. Yeah? So we found the food items. That comes from here. Weight's just going to display with, again, part of my formatting, Just the fields. Alrighty. Hey,
Beautiful.
there we go. Except we seem to have an error. It seems to display them all.
No, we have a dot each within a dot each.
Yes,
So
we
you
do.
gotta end the first one.
Good eye. That was quick. Oh, jeez. Probably sees my bad formatting. Alright.
Keep adding it.
Yeah. But the point is not to look at the format. The point is just that we can now show the different foods. So if we click on snack, right, we have nothing there. Let's go ahead and add some other foods. So snack should be 4. Plural. Ah. Oh, sorry. Section.
Where do the homework is loaded from the files?
When you do the homework,
So load this from the files.
yeah, you should load it from the database, right? So these are all being loaded from the database. You could create this in DB seeds. You could add in some. Right, we could probably here create some food items for each section if you wanted to. We also have helpful here. Except here, we've just supplied the section IDs. It's not very useful. What's a good snack? That's some sweet tooth, man. There we go. And we'll create one more. Let's create a lunch item. Some Vietnamese food in here. Awesome. Home menu. Undefined method each for nil. Oh, seems like we come across our first bug. What should we do here? If food items are present. Right, and we'll take all this, and again, double the equal sign. Alrighty, so if food items are present, we'll display them. Here's our default menu. Click on snack. We get some donuts. For breakfast. We have no dinner. We have some lunch. Does that make sense? The bug we just faced was if there's no parameters, right? There's no way to know what to show, so that's why we need to add in if food items not present. Otherwise, this throws an error if food items is nil. Yeah? That makes sense, everyone?
That's going to be useful later for users or different permissions for which links to show.
Cool. Alrighty. Thanks, guys. And I guess we'll break for lunch.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.